it's a way to stay connected to original culture. As I learn more about myself and my ancestors and the land that I've inhabited and cultural practices that I have inherited and try to figure out without there being any other way to do it. And so it's about a way to carry on what I consider the disconnected oral tradition of African people. That served as our media. It served as our ways of passing on tradition and rites of passage to the next generation. It served as a way to understand how to uphold our elders and a way to be accountable to a structure that was designed to be equitable, to keep us secure and to keep our culture intact. And so I do feel it, even if I don't understand the word sometimes. I feel it in Black music. It's a way to trace my personal existence back to where I belong. And so this upholds my sense of belonging, no matter what it looks like out here in these streets.
Black music to me is like balm, like healing, comfort, just makes me feel good music. Even when you're sad and down, it's just feel good anytime. That's what it is to me.
Well, for me, I just cannot recall a time that there wasn't music in my life, in my family, in my community. And what I have really appreciated about African-American music, Black music, is that it has really worked to inform around historical movements in this country. Mm-hmm. You know, there was always some music, there were always some artists who could paint the picture using the music, using the words. And so that has always been so crucial to me. And, you know, I grew up with Gil Scott-Heron, for example. I mean, it's like, who can't appreciate that, appreciate his music and his message. And it's just so many that I could name. But yeah, I have the utmost respect for it, for what it has done for me culturally and spiritually. And there's no genre that has not included Black music.
Yes, that's been one of the main points of the book, is that Black music tells our stories. Like you said, like you and Angel were saying, it passes along our oral traditions in a way that I don't think any other culture has done. And we are waiting on Mr. Darryl. He is joining.
Just, yeah.
I thought he was in here. I don't see him yet. I was gonna say, Angel, John, if you have something, I'm gonna try and contact Darryl for a second.
Okay. I just dropped another thing. So the study guide I use is probably like, it's a lot of words, not as easy to read. So I found this e-note that is copied and pasted here. And it just says Blues People is a sociocultural analysis for the multiple roles of music for African-American people throughout the US history, tracing the influences and interactions of European and African genres back to colonial times. Baraka shows how innovation and tradition supported and inspired Africans and their descendants, even in the darkest of times. I think that was really, you know, it captures what I was saying about Black music being a wayfinder for me, a way to trace back. And also, I believe I heard that when Barbara, you spoke about the history that the music has carried. I think that's so important, that we have this sense of Sankofa all the time, especially now during this period after the pandemic. We've been looking for answers for a long time, but I think that this has been one of the times when it's been the clearest for them to come across. And it's the profound like wisdom of what Black culture is about, Black literature, just the idea that Amiri Baraka wrote this text, and it's something else that's been left behind for us to be able to find these ways and connect it to things that we might have been feeling or intuiting. So I just thought I would share that as we wait. I also recognize another academic and a voice, very powerful voice on the call, and that's Antonia Randolph, who is a professor at the University of North Carolina. I just wanted to acknowledge you and wonder if you had anything you wanted to say to just, get us all prepared for this discussion from your viewpoint.
Angel, you just called me out. That's all right though. Hey everybody. Yeah, as I was listening to people talk about what Black music means to you all, I was thinking about a discussion I was just having yesterday with my partner. We were talking about hip hop. I study hip hop culture, and just about the evolution of hip hop, where it used to be a live performance culture that focused on the DJ, and then it turned into a culture where people would go into their car or listen on their Walkman to music individually. But the time when hip hop was invented and where it brought communities together, people who from different boroughs of the New York City who wouldn't normally kind of interact with each other, just that ability for music to create an umbrella for folks to find commonality where music is the bridge. And also thinking about these discussions about house music that's been going on social media these days, just the how music can be so many things at once, where house music is a secular music, but borrows so much from sacred traditions. And the way that Black music holds all those things at once without having to declare itself one thing or the other. I just think that one of the points of Baraka's books, I think, is that music is uniquely central to Black culture. And I don't think we give it enough credit about how defining music is for understanding ourselves as a people. So those are some initial, thoughts that I have.
Thank you.
That is a great point, Antonia. Thank you. Thank you for that. And we're going to go from professor to the next professor, because we got Brother Daryl Stover on the line now. So, Daryl, we were just talking about Black music and, what it means to us, and, how just introduce, went over an overview of Amiri Baraka and his career a little bit. And what it means to him, how he's been so influential in the Black arts movement and beyond. So I'm going to give it over to you, kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the book and throw some questions out there as well. Y'all welcome Professor Stover.
Cool. Well, I'm glad y'all were able to hold it down. I'm sorry that the technology chooses to be the finicky thing that it always can and will be until we find a way to just do this all face to face, as I like to say, and shake off the COVID cobwebs. But I think more importantly is within the context of this discussion relative to this particular book of my good friend and mentor, Amiri Baraka, as I, clutch a copy which has his imprimatur in it. I guess he signed this for me in '88. But for me, when we look at the whole notion of Black music, Black music, I like to say, is our vitamins. It is an eternal component of both our expressiveness, but our way to both inspire and engage our intellects. It allows us to meditate and chill, and it is martial music. It carries us into war, and we are consistently at war. I doubt that Amiri would even disagree with the statements that I just shared. I just think that when I revisit this book, as I am apt to do every semester, because it's a component of what I teach in Black popular culture, is the fact that Amiri lays out a history, and he lays it out that way because that's how he was inspired to learn it, as history, Black music as history. And so with that being the fact, we see how he carries us from, am I frozen? Let's see here.
We
Yeah, I
can
think
hear you
are
clearly,
frozen.
but I think your video is frozen.
Okay, all right, let me keep going then. As he lays it out as history, that comes as a direct result of his training, his mentor, his professor, which was Sterling Brown, who was at Howard University from the early years. Sterling Brown was born on the campus of Howard University, to be honest. And so his whole focus on our music was as history as well. It provides the basis for who we are. And what Amiri does through Blues People is carries us through that history as it is. He places the blues front, center, and foremost in all of that. Thus the title, thus the whole notion of who we are as a people. Now, some of us run away from being blues people. He gets into the class thing in the book, right? And some of you may have picked up on that. But I think the most important question that each of us need to ask ourselves is, where do we stand? Do we see ourselves as an individual and collectively as blues people? Or do we see ourselves as something else? Because he also brings out that fact that kernel where, you know, some folks, a lot of us, blues has no meaning. We're not attached to it. We run away from it. When I was booking the Bull Durham Blues Festival, sometimes I'd have white folks ask me, well, how come there are not more Black people here? Well, I mean, for the most part, you have to understand that especially with blues, that music was played in our communities. It was played in our homes. It was played by our parents. It was played by our uncle singing. And so it has a different sort of vitality for us. It's not singularly for entertainment. And that goes back to me saying our music is vitamins. But what I want to throw out to everybody who's here, because I could go on ad infinitum, as you know, what I want to throw out to everyone here is, where do you see yourself as blues people based on how this book may have put that before you?
I'll start off with a short answer. I absolutely see myself as a blues person, particularly because I am, you know, hip hop to the core. I love hip hop. It is the thing that has been my educator. It taught me literal versus figurative language. When I was in 4th grade, I could see these patterns as early as that. And I grew up listening to Roxanne Shante, listening to it, you know, be played off of the cassette tape from, you know, my cousin living in Philadelphia and like funneling music to us in Franklinton, North Carolina. So it was also a way to awaken me and not feel like, oh gosh, being this country girl, that I don't have access. The access will always find me. And I felt really lucky about that, because hip hop is what tells you exactly what's going on, no matter how quote unquote negative it is, or how quote unquote positive it is. And I consider it being born of all of these genres. And it's also a genre that takes all of the previous genres with it, as well as continues to innovate. And that's how I see myself as a blues person.
Okay. Anyone else?
Dig it, dig it. I'm definitely, hey, by the way, Daryl, good to see you again.
What's up, Narera?
Yeah, I am definitely the child of blues people, and there's a part of my soul that's blues. You know what I mean? Because I understand blues is like folk music. You know, it's like R&B, rhythm and blues, or the rhythm that I was talking about earlier, with like just organic conversation that people generally have with themselves, that somehow creates a rhythm, or this organic conversation that people have with their environment, that, when you listen hard enough and long enough, you hear a rhythm, a cadence, you know what I mean? And so like that conversation is like folk music, and folk music is blues, kind of like shine through a particular lens, you know what I mean? And I certainly know in Mahmoud's lens was Black people here in America, and what that, not only the struggles that represented, but the triumphs, the invisible triumphs that came out of the Black community because of that struggle, that also are a part of the recognition process, not just for European Americans and white people, but for Black people too. You know what I mean? Which kind of lends itself to, I think, what Daryl was talking about earlier. Some people, like, they don't see themselves as blues people. It's because they don't. There's a lack of awareness and acknowledgement of what blues is and what blues is to them, and how it's a part of their makeup, whether they like it or not. And so the lack of acknowledgement of it is really just an irrational act, you know. And so, like, that, yes, definitely, I think all people can be inevitably a blues people when you shine folk music and natural rhythms through a particular lens.
I mean, well,
You know?
Angela just shared that, she considered herself blues people through that lens of hip hop, and how that manifests and reflects. So, it's not singularly a music of some pastime. It is a music that consistently influences all other popular music forms. Yeah, I could say on the planet, but certainly here in the United States. Anyone else have insights that they want to share about how they may identify themselves as blues people?
I definitely see myself as blues people. I grew up with music, and my first memories of music were church, and just hymnals, and the way we made the way we made rhythm without even having a piano. Because my grandma's church was like very, very old school. They still had wooden floors. They didn't have a piano, and it would just be them in the choir singing. And that was my first kind of introduction to rhythm. And then, once you go to, my uncle, I used to go with him on fourth Sundays, because he would play the quartet every fourth Sunday. So that was my introduction to blues, and how the blues played a part in things. And then, of course, just being a kid, like Angel said, growing up with hip hop, that expanded my horizons on, this song was, I would hear my cousins say, this song was actually this song, which I got introduced to funk and soul through that. Yeah, so I feel like I'm definitely blues people, and learn the lineage of Black music kind of that way.
Yeah, I wanted to say I am Yeah, I'm definitely a blues person. As I had said earlier, there is no time that there wasn't music in my home, in my house growing up. Um, and I think too, because I'm an elementary educator, I've had to stay up on the various genres of music because our young people, so I had to delve into hip hop and so forth and so on. But I'm it's in my blood. That's the best way I can put it. It's in my blood. I love all music, and the blues just seem to have really played a significant part, a role in my family, because there was always music, always. I can't think of a time that there wasn't. So I'm just thankful that I had that experience, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning. As our music have evolved, I can recall all of the controversy actually around our music. Like in church, you couldn't sound too secular, for example. And then when hip hop started crossing over and we had artists of other culture or so forth, there was that whole controversy about, they're stealing our music. Is that appropriate? Should we allow this? The language, all of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I am a blues person. And my favorite chapter in the book was chapter 6, when it talks about that transition from slavery to basically trying to figure out yourself as a person, as an individual, as someone who has um, who has control over their own life. And in blues, it's not that I know the music. I know the music a little bit. I had to seek it out. We didn't have a lot of music in my house, but it always spoke to me as if it were as if something deeper was going on, even if the melody or the lyrics were simple, or the music had some type of repetition to it. It felt like it was saying something beyond what was on the surface. And so so that's what I connect with, is the time that you have alone, the time that you have to reflect after, especially being somewhere that has, I don't know, almost broken you, or somewhere where you've had a lot of tension and being released from that tension. The blues came out of that, and it's speaking to something deeper. And that's what I connect with. And that's what I mean when I say I'm a blues person.
Okay. So we now move, after having come off of Juneteenth, right, where Tara has just shared with us about that chapter in the book. For her was that transition, post-slavery, emancipation. Now, granted, Amiri uses the word slave a whole lot in this book, almost the first half of the book, to really set up the disconnect from the past that the music then engenders, especially moving from the South to the North. So he sets up several regions, both within a time construct and a geography, to lay the music out for us and its unfolding evolution. I'll say my favorite chapter for the tail end of the discussion, but I want to go there with everyone else. What might have been the favorite chapters for any of the rest of you online?
I'll chime in. I don't mind going first. Chapter 6 is one of my favorites too, because it led me to chapter 7. And chapter 7, there's a particular part in it where Baraka talks about the voodoo man. And I've been fascinated by this. I've been fascinated by so many things that remind me of what this thing was and what we've evolved to in terms of a level of understanding. How, just like I mentioned, the watermelon thing, don't eat watermelon in person, or don't call Chicken Bone Park, because that's derogatory. They're renaming it Black Wall Street's Garden, Black Wall Street Gardens downtown. But without like some of the working class and the efforts, people with trades who created what we consider the Hayti community, without that, there would have never been a Black Wall Street. And the things that are actually not romanticized about what Black Wall Street and the Hayti community was here. And so when I was able to get all the way down to the root, and he talked about the voodoo man, I was like, this is where some of the shame started, in terms of don't be Black, don't be connected to those things that make you who you are and make you this really powerful people, this very creative people. And so I found solace when he talked about the traveling coon, and he talked about the voodoo man, particularly. He said, I've been voodooed and hoodooed, and how, there are so many spiritual practices and codes and things that we have access to, that we've always had access to, in order to create the music and pass these codes down. So that was my favorite chapter, chapter 7. But it started with chapter 6 because it talked about the primitive parts, and then what led to what's considered the classic blues.
Right. Yeah, that transition that also still embeds itself in Africanism, which he comes back to using even that term later in the book. But he speaks to that earlier, and to some extent, it plays itself in various ways, even going so far as to talk about how some of those Africanisms are maintained within the church relative to the practices that actually Brother Q was talking about. Don't have a piano, but you got the choir, you got hands, you got the floor. And so maintaining specific components of rhythmicity, percussiveness, and the like are essential elements that, again, play themselves out in all music, because of why? The blues is the root. Anyone else tied into chapter 6 and 7, or were there other chapters? I think he does a good job with the timeline and those major socio-historical moments of significant leap in the music, going from what would have been the blues, what was the spirituals, what is ragtime, what is jazz in its more realer sense, and what goes into what manifests itself into the larger band formations and their utilization of blues, like James Reese and Count Basie and others. But anyone else have a favorite chapter in the book, or a signature moment in the book where, something was said there that was really earth-shattering, or something that really turned the music up?
I think it was interesting, chapter, I think it's 9, I believe, when he talks about the middle class. And even though it wasn't the time period that I'm thinking of, I was thinking of when he wrote it, he was talking about Louis Armstrong's time, and how the jazz heads would differentiate themselves. But it made me also think of how the middle class, how that middle class grew, and their children changed the face of music as well. Like they grew from.
Hello,
Hey,
good evening, everybody.
Hey, how you doing? So how their children's music kind of changed how their parents try to get away from the South and separate themselves from that, but their children end up coming back to it and creating funk, like George Clinton came out of Jersey, and just how all these artists of the 70s ended up changing the face of music by reaching back to their Southern roots. So I just thought that was fascinating as far as the lineage, even though he didn't go into that, he went a little bit into it, into the continuum, but how that continuum evolved. And you know, those children of Louis Armstrong became, you know, Sly and the Family Stone. And the children of Sly and the Family Stone became Grandmaster Flash. And you know, and the children of him, you know, became the Roots. So how that continuum just kept evolving.
Yeah, the evolution. Donna, how are you? What we're doing is identifying aspects of the book that were significant, or really turning the volume up on our music relative to our own personal experience in reading the book.
Well, actually, am I on mute?
No.
Okay. So actually on Juneteenth, when I was down at the Golden Belt, which is the spectacular market from Juneteenth on Saturday, I ran into a young lady from the NAMI from Charlotte area. And she gave me a Durham person who had some paperwork that I could use for meetings. She gave me her number. And so I reached out to her. I believe her name was Sherry, I believe. And so we text each other, and we said we would kind of set up a time and figure out what exactly I needed. And it was good to find another, Durham person, NAMI person at an event like that, because there was, hundreds of people there. And the table had lots of information on it, and different places where if you're needing help that you could log on to. And so, yeah, we chatted for a while. So I was glad. So, yeah, I know you're busy, and you didn't have to put me on the spot. It wasn't that. It's just that I'm always in these events, and I said it's a perfect opportunity when there's something going on, because someone will be struggling, or know someone's that's struggling, and take the opportunity to introduce NAMI to them. And I think Alliance Health was there as well. And so it was a nice rounded, because sometimes we forget we're still in trauma. We're not even post-COVID. People keep using that. We are not post-COVID. we are, still experiencing the trauma of it, and some more than others. So I try to, address that, as much as I can help. But thank you for thinking about me.
When we listen to the music.
No, that's pretty.
When we listen to the music that is evident in Amiri's book, and when I say that, I say, who are those that he references? And when we look at who he references, I think it's important to note that there is a major transition point into the 1900s, where he talks about getting to the jazz age. But what was the significance of quote unquote jazz age was the fact that it was women blues singers who were the first recorded. Women blues singers who were the most popular in those times. So he starts to reference what? Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, and a host of others. And I think it's important to realize within the unfolding development of our music, both with that rural root, that Southern thing, that there were these women who then were the real popularizers of the music, that really bring it into an age of massive entertainment. And more importantly, were the first who were recorded and put on vinyl. And so I think what Amiri sets up is a whole discussion around our music becoming more visible in a popular sense. And that's where I think when I hear each of you speak about for you in this day and time, Q, you ran it down relative to who handed off to who as we come up through a lineage, but we come up to a lineage that brings us into this era still of the significance of hip hop. But we also must understand that it comes out of the blues, and the popular music of the times was jazz, but the most popular and first and foremost were women blues singers. I don't know if any of you caught that, but I keep bringing us back to the blues. And in doing that, I thought we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on those women blues singers.
I think that's a really important point that you made in terms of the centrality of women blues singers, and forgetting or in the under acknowledgement of blues. I think within like young folks, people don't know that a precedent for Meg Thee Stallion is somebody like Ma Rainey or Bessie Smith, like the explicit sexuality of female blues singers, was shocking at the time, but they were popular. Like Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith and like other folk talking about, drinking and fighting and smoking and, enjoying sex and all these kind of things was a staple. It was popular. It was popular among Black folks and then among white folks. And the fact that I don't think a lot of people of my generation forward have that kind of firsthand experience with the blues. A lot of context for current artists, Cardi B, Meg Thee Stallion, I don't know, Nicki Minaj, like the female rappers I'm naming. The context for what they're doing having precedent, I think we lose that. So I think that's important in thinking about how important Black women blues singers were.
The other thing that Amiri addresses is the bands, and actually the Southwestern bands, that would be, we're speaking especially of Kansas City, Oklahoma, and the like bands where people out like Count Basie and Charlie Parker came from. Or they had women vocalists as the front and center. That's why we can have such a major figure as Billie Holiday, be seen as this blues maven, but also a very massively important jazz vocalist as well, because of her affiliation with the times and when she came on the scene, but her affiliation with the bands of the 30s into the 40s. And so it's also important to note those that then came after her, like Sarah Vaughan and others that carry us from the 40s through the 50s, especially. The big shift and change happens in the music in so many ways, going from these bands to going to bebop in the 40s, which is to be honest, that's the music that Amiri was starting to hear. What he references in the book, his father calling him a bebopper. We don't call those of us who enjoy rap and the like hip hoppers, but we do reference the significance of rap music and those who are into it. But the fact that his father would refer to him as a bebopper, and he would include that, and I go back to just wanting to reference the fact that someone in the chat had pointed out that he dedicated this book to his parents. Certainly, it is a phenomenal book. He knew what he was doing in a very strong way when he wrote this book, and thought it would be a justifiable dedication and a justifiable and significant work to place his parents first and foremost in the front end. And then referencing his father calling him a bebopper. But yeah, bebop carries us into the 50s, and there were transitions there. There was the cool music, which allows him to then have another lowbrow, highbrow middle class input into his analysis of how the music evolves and how it evolves within the notion of social class, especially social class and strata as it relates to Black people. But that music gets amped up with the hard boppers that then come along in the 50s. And that's where he starts to carry us, even going into that final chapter, the modern scene. And with the modern scene, he starts to bring out Sonny Rollins, John Coltrane, and others who are saxophone players. Saxophone players, which he points out earlier in the book, the fact that that instrument became the focus, certainly in the late 40s with the bands, and that would include the likes of a Charlie Parker and others. But for me, I'm a hard bop guy. Yeah, I'm older than old school. Yeah, I like my funk, I like my blues, but I dig my hard bop. And so for him to reference the likes of Coltrane, especially in that light, and carry us into, keeping in mind he wrote this book in the early 60s. So it's just when things are about to go into that transition of how our music responds into a very heavier way to what was happening. Tara.
Oh, I was just thinking as you were talking, he seems to hold up the blues and bebop as the, he puts those two at the top. And I think that he does that because they're both of those genres, they're both about innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he keeps going back to, he constantly goes back to the blues, not the classic blues, but the blues that came out of the slave tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because it was something that got started but never quite took the path that it could have taken if, other things like had gotten in the way, like the Black middle class, like whites kind of picking up on the swing and making it its own thing. And I think he thinks maybe bebop got back to that. And I just noticed that he had really great things to say about those two musics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When he speaks of those periods of leap, he talks about World War I and how, when our those who went off to fight in that war came back, he speaks to the fact that there was a whole different nother thinking, a whole nother realization of one's place in the world after coming back from World War I. And this is the reference that really sticks to me. He's referencing Richard Wright in his book, Black Boy. And he's talking about this new thinking, but he's talking about it this way. And I quote, as he quotes Richard Wright from Black Boy, among the topics that Southern white men did not like to discuss with Negroes were the following: American white women, the Ku Klux Klan, France, and how Negroes soldiers fared while there, French woman, Jack Johnson, the entire northern part of the United States, the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, U.S. Grant, General Sherman, Republican Party, slavery, social equality, communism, socialism, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. So what Richard Wright is setting up and what Amiri is pointing out is that there was a whole new freedom of thinking and engagement and identity that started to manifest itself. And that also was a major contributing factor to the socio-historical evolution of Black music and Black people. And he does the same thing again with referencing World War II and that shift with bebop hitting and that carrying us through into the 50s with hard bop. If we were to try to examine or use that example to now, or to just after when this book was published, the civil rights movement is starting to heat up. 63, look, you got the March on Washington happens. W.E.B. Du Bois dies in Ghana and is buried there. Birmingham, Alabama, and our 4 girls are killed there. The march from Selma, on Selma, among other things that were happening in the civil rights movement and then the Black Power movement, and what the music did and what the music said. I'm interested in now carrying us to some extent beyond the pages of Blues People to where each of us may see our music having gone in that 60s period to where it went, and more importantly, where it is going. So think about it in that context and what weighs heavy on your minds.
I think for me, it would be, and I guess it was just seemed to be a controversial period for me, was when the talk shifted to crossover. You know, artists were coming up and it was all about, well, you had to have a song or a beat or whatever that would cross over and appeal to the larger masses. And so I think I sort of struggled with that because, you know, I held my people's music close and dear to my heart. So I had an issue with that, you know, about the whole controversy around crossover. So I had to process that.
Anyone else?
I just
Yeah,
love that Barbara brought that up because that's just, it's got me thinking so much. And I'm just going to say that. Thank you for saying that.
I think one of the things that Amiri Baraka does well is he states a problem from the perspective of the past, how it is in the present, and some things that you need to problem solve for the future. I think he does that well in his writing, and I think he does that well in interviews and speeches that he's had. And so I can see him warding both the blues and bebop. The blues as a reflection of a response to struggle that we were having in America. I mean, he echoes that a little bit in The Dutchman what's the male character's name? He slipped out of my brain. I think it's Clay.
It is Clay.
It is Clay. Oh yeah, okay. Like when Clay just goes off and he says, like, you know, Bessie Smith wouldn't have sung the blues if she could just engage in a little bit of justice and murder. You know what I mean? Like, so clearly he's echoing the idea that, you know, blues is a triumphal attempt at processing the macabre and the surreal and the horror, you know, and so and how he looks at bebop as a complete and utter divergent from that. You know what I mean? When you think about the percussive freedom in bebop and the African almost move for move African movements that are in bebop dancing, you know what I mean? It's he does that well. Like, this is what the problem is, this is what the history of the problem is, and this is what a problem solved looks like. It looks like bebop. You know what I mean? And so when you talk about the elevation of music, I really think about it from that perspective of what problem is the music going to solve, and that by that I can track, I think, what I think music will do. You know what I mean? Like it's very
Right.
clear that, you know, the 70s and the reemergence of Afrocentricity was seemed to be musically from the 70s to the 80s and even the 90s seemed to be a reflection of here's what the solution looks like. It looks like the Jackson 5 singing "Can You Feel It?" You know what I mean? That's what the solution looks like. The solution looks like Earth, Wind, and Fire. The solution looks like Sun Ra. The solution looks like, you know what I mean? It looks like these things. And so like in my brain, the elevation or the switchover of music will I think will go back to a level of profundity that I think is missing right now, in that it's not solving a problem. You know what I mean? Like the music is not serving a function outside of entertainment per se. And so like I think when music starts solving problems, that's when you get like the early forms of hip hop. You know, broken glass everywhere. People walk around like they just don't care. That was they were talking about a problem. You know what I'm saying? And having a solution. You know what I'm saying? And so like that's what I think of when I think about what do I feel the next evolution of music is. The next evolution of music is, I think, when it gets back around to, you know, Earth, Wind, and Fire, when it gets back to ABBA, when it gets back to, you know what I'm saying, and disco, when it gets back to those things.
Right, music and service to us. Now, you guys had a discussion about crossover, it seems, and certainly when you brought up Earth, Wind, and Fire narrating, this whole notion of crossover, quote unquote, crossover appeal. When we look at our access to the music. Now, I've got a house full of records here. That's what I go back to over and over and over again, to just go through records and play. And we probably need that. I play records in my classes that I teach. So my archive is quite full, and I make the selection. I'm the selector, right? Versus if we look at something like Spotify or any of the other services, and you're asking, it to play and give you this playlist and play this music. So let's use Earth, Wind, and Fire, for example. The two primary songs that are the go-tos for Spotify and other of those services are primarily September and Boogie Wonderland, which are primarily crossover hits by Earth, Wind, and Fire. They're more recent in their recording history. And so, I mean, in time after time after time, I hear that. And I'm more or less one who will have to tell Alexa, next song, get play, or heaven forbid you ask it to play an Earth, Wind, and Fire song, and then it chooses something else to play after that. And it's not even Earth, Wind, and Fire. So when you look at how we are immersed in a certain environment for accessing this music, especially the majority of the populace, especially our younger folks, those decisions are being made for them. There's a different sort of environment in which our music is now produced and distributed and granted access. Amiri touches on two major other innovations that were essential to how popular and available our music became, both through the recording of it and access on vinyl, and then the radio as a whole nother source. And so even when we look to the radio now and what we get, we've got satellite radio. And some of the mixes, actually, right now, I've even gotten into listening to 95.3 because they've got some playlists that I can appeal to. They seem to be a 90s focused hip hop station, and they've got some positiveness to them. I say all of that to say is, how do you access music now? How do you access Black music? How do you access, if you will, whatever the latest form of the blues is for you?
Well, I think initially when they started putting our, the older music, blues and whatever on, what is it, CDs? And I just started, because before that it would be all on an LP vinyl, right? And so I think rather than, because the vinyls go away, they're in your storage, your garage, you just sold them off or whatever. So that really helped me in my mind to still have access to some of the greatest music, because now I can play it on a CD player. So that to me was very important and valuable at that time. And now I access through, SXM. If they play a old song, original, whatever, I'm probably going to download it. So that's really how I access to keep it on a playlist that I can just play at any given time. So that's what I've been doing in terms of accessing that music that I really like and want to listen to whenever I want to.
Let me ask you a question, Daryl.
Well, is there anybody else who wanted to respond to my question first, or just right quick?
I was just gonna say streaming, I think is good and bad in both ways. In that streaming really, for lack of a better term, fucks over the artist with being compensated. Like folks don't make half of the money they used to make off of songwriting and stuff like that anymore. But it does give access to this whole catalog of work that I think a lot of folks wouldn't have access to readily available if it wasn't for streaming. So a lot of cats, like you said, if they're guided in the right direction, they're able to access all this music. And it gives, and like you said, you might go to an Earth, Wind and Fire station, but say I'm a 15-year-old who knows nothing about Earth, Wind and Fire. The next song they'll play is something similar to that. So that if they like that song, then they can write it down and kind of go down this YouTube rabbit hole or whatever to kind of access folks that they wouldn't normally have access to. So I think there are pros in streaming, and there are definitely cons in streaming if you're the artist.
Okay.
I agree. I feel like there's a pattern. We're talking about bebop and what we now see as hip hop. And there was something else, Daryl, that you had mentioned. It'll come back to mind, but I found it in chapter 3 when what looks like hip hop. I mean, it is hip hop. When Amiri Baraka was talking about Christianity being this religion to the oppressed people, right? And the more and more people became started to abide by these Christian rules, the easier they were able to be controlled, and the less likely they were to run away, right? Because there's these ties. And when we talk about hoodoo women and hoodoo men and voodoo men, these were the descendants of enslaved Africans who knew how to hide the spiritual practices within Christianity so that people would still have access to it and find it, right? That's how I see this this instance of bebop and evolution, and even the streaming. Like, it can go both ways. It still connects from the past to the past, so that people can still have an opportunity to find their way. And so one of the things I think about oftentimes these days is when we are conscious of this kind of thing and we look at what's negative about it, because Q's absolutely right, people are not making the money or streaming like the revenue they should be. But when we are aware, we are able to control the narrative. And I think that's what's been the problem before. You can put your narrative on this based on what you know, being reconnected to your origin, to your culture, in these ways that we have been able to find it bit by bit. And by doing so, connect those parts and they end up making a whole. And that's one of the things that I loved about this book. And I continue to love about the book because that brought me back to these religious practices and talks about Christianity in ways that's very difficult to get Black folk to talk about.
By talking about the music.
Right. Because it was always devil's music. They said that about the blues. They said that about everything. And, you know, kids sneak out of the house and go and sing in the sugar shacks and the juke joints. And they would be completely, like, oftentimes disowned by their families.
Right.
And so it's either you out here doing this secular music or you singing gospel, right? Which is the blues. And so I just find it to be fascinating that was what that was something that came full circle for me when you asked that question.
Yeah. Well, you got, you know, you look at Aretha Franklin, for example, powerfully out of the church. You look at the turmoil caused by Ray Charles by mixing gospel and soul and Western. and the fact remains that, you know, these mashups, if we want to even talk about gospel and talk about a Kirk Franklin for that matter, and some others that are doing some of those things of hip hop and gospel and the like, it's there and it's undeniable. And then there are those deeper things that are there, the Africanisms, as Amiri and other scholars would speak to. You had a question you were tossing out, Nareri.
Yeah, I was wondering if one of your points or one of the things that you could assume from from a perspective of your question is the value of music based on how you access.
Yeah.
Might you think that, you know, one of the things that Amiri valued, one of the reasons why Amiri valued, and I think one of the reasons why you value, especially as a vinyl person, the person who is a decider, as you said, you choose, is the process that you went through to gain the music. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it's like, you know, people of a different generation value information in a different way because they had to jump on a bicycle and they had to bicycle 2 miles and they had to go to the library and then they had to look it up in the catalog and then they had to find the book and read the book. And so there was a value based on energy output and calorie burn that's different from the value of, you know, got it, listen to it, come out, you know,
yeah.
There's a different calorie burn. And can we say that's a different value because of the calorie or the lack thereof? You know, you listen to your favorite song, you also, you know, you dance to it, you know, all of that stuff.
Well, I ask my students, you know, about how they access music. What is it they're accessing? What purposes does it serve? And one of the interesting things is, and this is before we get fully into the music unit, but I'm just starting the class talking about Black popular culture and the significance of hip hop being global and showing them how, like, a song that was recorded, if you will, and written by John Legend and Common, Glory, which is off the soundtrack from the movie, is able to chart, in essence, in other countries, in essence, appear in the top 25 in a place like Austria, a place like Australia, a place like Belgium. And so it's the popularity of Black music and the fact that these folks are accessing it probably in 9 times out of 10 online, not through the vinyl, and maybe even through the movie, and maybe over the radio. And obviously it resonates to whoever those selectors are in those places that puts it out to the public, and the public buys it. The public takes it to heart. So when we go to this, how do you value the music based on how you access it and where you access it from, and how does it translate into something of significance for you? And yeah, there is the immediacy of going online that today's society has, especially our younger people. But I will say this, by the time I finished with the jazz unit, which is right after the blues unit, and all the students in the class have to listen to Miles Davis kind of blue.
Mhm.
And what they point out is, I never thought about this, but now I like that. And I like to have that playing while I'm studying.
Yeah.
So it establishes an atmosphere of quietude, solitude, and gives them an opportunity to hear the music, but also to think, to study. And so I think there's something to be said for the significance of what even the musics of the past have. And there are still music makers that are in those traditions. And I think we need to find ways of seeking them out and making them even more popular. I mean, when I was booking the Bull Durham Blues Festival, I chose to mix it up because there's plenty of blues artists out there. You know, some of the earlier practice was to, you know, invite back an artist they had just had the previous year. Well, it's like, no, there's a host of artists out there. But one of the things I noticed in response, like, for example, when I brought in somebody like Odetta, a folk singer, you know, there was one woman I saw, and she was mesmerized the whole time. She came up to the barrier fence and just leaned on that. So obviously, Odetta, she knew about, but here she was able to see her live and in person. And that's what I'm getting to now, is the whole notion. Amiri had access to all of this music, especially the music of the 40s, 50s, and 60s forward, but certainly that period, which he values the most, as live performed music in spaces and places where he could safely engage it, as could the rest of the populace. And that whole notion of experiencing this music live is a whole nother question about its impact and its availability, and how do we seek it out and engage it? I mean, am I going to spend $250 to go to the next Dreamville festival? Well, there are those who do, because that music and the selection of artists that perform at Dreamville represent a certain aspect of the totality of the music's out there. But it's very positivist, and I would say, in so many ways, invigorating and inspirational for those who attend and experience it. That ticket price, woo! Now, what do I do every Tuesday night? I go catch some free jazz at 9:00 with Brian Horton down at the Kingfisher Bar, because I don't have to pay, but I'm going to hear some really good music in the tradition of the hard bop era. And so that's a significant component for me, a man my age, to still have access to that kind of music. There are others who go to church for the music and what that means for them. So when you brought up that point about Amiri, you know, giving answers, and that the music gives us answers many times. Yeah, for me, I find those answers when I go to hear Brian Horton playing in a trio format, which is much like someone like Sonny Rollins, who Amiri mentions in the book when he references the modern scene. How else can we establish these sorts of spaces and places to help younger folks have a better idea about musical tradition and to discern between the noise and the salvation and the answers in the music? That's a problem for now, right? But I think Amiri does point in a clear direction. I think he points in a direction that is important when you talk about here. This book is about our music, but it also is about us. It's about our history in this country and the making of us and who we are. And I think that is significant. And now the book is about 60 years old, but it has consistent relevance because it places our music front and center as essential to us understanding ourselves and understanding the music as history.
Yeah, I failed to mention, I love Shazam. I think that just gives me access because I can be in my car, they play something and I just, tap on Shazam, listen, it'll tell me the title and the artist. I meant to mention that earlier because I think I've gone to Shazam quite a bit. But I also want to say, being an elementary educator, you'd be amazed at children who really are in tune to this music because their parents play it in the house. And, they'll tell you in a heartbeat, oh, that's old school. And I'm looking at a little second grader saying it's old school. I'm like, how you know about old school? And so, because parents still play the music. And a lot of our young people, even middle school, high school, they know the words to these songs. And, they oblige us older people with trying to dance to it and all of that. But they really, I find they know the words and can sing the words to these songs that they were, not yet born. But a lot of it is because in their family, somebody is still playing the music.
Yeah.
And so I just love that. It's such a joy to see a lot of our children who are in tune to it. They may not get all the meaning behind it, but they still sing it and dance to it. So that's just, a joy to see that.
Yeah, well, there's some folks doing the work in essence. That says that there's some parents that are doing the work, exposing because they see the importance, and the kids also see.
And I feel like that's a natural way of, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I feel like that's a natural way that, the music speaks to us and gives us direction, and is in fact constantly solving problems, y'all, because this new song, Break My Soul, Beyonce dropped right after Drake dropped a house music song too. Like that melody is house, what's the name of the song? It's just like totally escaped me, but I think that's what, your kids are hearing the Beyonce and, being able to relate it to something that they may have already heard at home. But I feel like if we just allow the music to be the music, it's going to always do what it's supposed to do, which is why it's so powerful. It's that Sankofa energy. It's going to always bring us back and inform us for our future. And I love hearing that too, because I was one of those kids talking about Hotter Than July, in elementary school, because that's what I heard, and Marvin Gaye's albums at home. And Songs in the Key of Life came out the year that I was born. And so I still carry those things with me. And when I taught years ago, I used those albums in my class. And I hear my kids like nowadays who are like grown people out here, my peers in these streets, they're, referring back to those things and doing amazing things as a result of just having the vibration. That vibration is important. That's something that we really can't put in our human being understanding on. It's something that works in the way that God does really use, and that's the mysterious ways. Music is mysterious. It's a mysterious spiritual energy.
And I was going to add, when Barbara brought up dance, I was in a 12-hour Zoom yesterday for Catherine Dunham's birthday. I was helping to coordinate and her work, and I just thought about how her work, as well as an anthropologist, and the history of dance and how our bodies also connect to the music, and how dance has also how she did for dance what Amiri did for music. She has this history, and how this history is kind of translated you know, through our bodies to the music as well, you know, as a social political thing. You know, we go from the cakewalk to, you know, the stanky leg, like how that all that kind of trend, how it's all the same thing, really, you know, but it all comes from an Africanism that, you know, our ancestors started, you know. So that I just wanted to throw that out there while we were
Yeah. By the way, I enjoyed bouncing in and out of that whole 12-hour shindig. I mean, it was very
it was a
well
marathon. Woo.
it was very well produced. It flowed. Well, I guess we can continue the discussion in so many ways.
I was gonna say it's 8:32, y'all. Usually we're wrapping up by now. So Daryl, if you want to, you know, if you want to close this out.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, for me, both from the standpoint of Amiri having been a good friend and a grand mentor, and it was, you know, this book that influenced so many others to take on the role as ethnomusicologists, to immerse themselves in looking at the music. I mean, I can speak more specifically even about my good friend Greg Tate, who passed earlier this year. He, as a cultural critic, was inspired and influenced by this book very specifically, which opened, you know, his eyes to the realities of what our cultural creativity is within the context of responding to our environment, to the things going on around us. And I think what Amiri does with this book is sets up a whole approach to understanding the evolution of our music. Unfortunately, he kicks this book off in '63 when he gets this out. And nobody was really doing this sort of thing. You know, it was certainly other people felt they understood our music even more so than us. And he made it clear, nah, first off, this is ours. Second off, this is why it is the way it is. And thirdly, this is, as Nariri referenced, Clay talking about Bessie Smith in that play, The Dutchman. Yeah, if we didn't have his music, some other stuff would be going on. And that's where Amiri leaves us in the book. He leaves us in the book with pointing out, yeah, you know, these musics are a reflection of us. And there's some things we're starting to look at. And who knows?
Yeah, and it saved my life and your life too.
So I think our music offers up, going back to the mystery that Angel pointed out, the mystery of our music has at times been much more powerful in its reflection and its impact. I mean, the question I toss to each of us as we close out is it as impactful now as it's ever been? Is it impactful in its own way, in ways that it might never have been before? More importantly, will it be impactful in the near and far future? Amiri points in a direction. I think it's up to us to move forward with that examination. And more importantly, as creatives, ensure that the evolution of our music stays on course to do what it's always done, re-identify us, carry us forward, win the struggle, win. Peace.
Beautiful note to end on, brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We got to have a professor every time now. This is solidified.
Same. This is where it is, right here.
It really is
amazing.
Daryl, thank you so much, man. And thank you, Barbara and Teresa and Tyra. Thank y'all so much for joining us again. We appreciate y'all. Speaking of July, hotter than July. The July book will be
Isn't that Octavia?
No, it's not Octavia. Octavia.
Oh,
is-
no, Sister Soldier.
Yeah, Sister Soldier. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, the coldest winter
Yeah,
ever.
the
There you
coldest
go.
winter ever. Yes.
Hotter
So
than
that would be
July. I
our
like it.
July. That would be our July book. Thank you all for joining us. Like I said, the next book will be July look at my calendar real quick. July the 28th will be our next book club. So hopefully we'll have another special guest. And Daryl, you're welcome to join us for the next book club as well.
Okay.
So thank y'all again, and everybody have a great night, and we will see y'all soon.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye.
Good night,
All right,
y'all.
people.
Good night.
Hey.